Welcome to the Rochford Files with your host, Andrew Rochford. And as I promised, this is the third sports stream of the past few days as it's my last few days in this setup. So I figured I had to do something a bit different to change things up a bit before I move out on Saturday. So with that being said, let's get started with this MLB stream. If you enjoy the sports content, please subscribe on YouTube. If you're someone who only likes my political content, please subscribe as well, because my goal is to please people that even if you only like part of the content, I would still appreciate that. But if you happen to like both, that's even better. So I'm going to try to keep this stream overall to about an hour, and not like the 2 to 3 hour streams that I had with my live NBA best players and the NFL thing that I had last night. Alright, so let's just do a quick recap of the standings, focus on a couple teams who came up short, specifically the Toronto Blue Jays and the Seattle Mariners. Alright, so yesterday on game 162, we had the possibility of chaos happening, and that would have meant a four-way tie. And what we ended up getting was the safe, predictable outcome, which league executives naturally enjoy, since they already have virtually every single game of the Yankees and Red Sox on national TV to begin with. And it's one of the big problems with Major League Baseball is the fact that they're probably the worst offender of the four major sports when it comes to trying to get people to care about more than just the few market or legacy franchises in the sport. So again, I'm just going to say that's one reasoning why league executives are overall pretty pleased with this outcome, and the fact that there was a moment where it looked slightly possible. I mean, the Yankees couldn't score until the ninth inning, but the Rays offense decided to take the complete day off. The Red Sox are trailing 5-1 on a day when they faced a starting pitcher making their debut, but then Rafael Devers hit a go-ahead home run in the ninth inning, and there was that. The Blue Jays had the second worst team tied for the worst team in baseball, with Baltimore Orioles matched up the whole weekend. So they had a really cake series to close things out. And Toronto also had another pretty easy series beforehand to set up to give themselves a chance with some help. But then again, it had to be a heartbreaking finish for the Seattle Mariners, because they're really like the Rockies of the American League. Ever since 2001, they just generally always manage to get about 70 wins every year, regardless of how much talent is on the roster. And they never quite bottom out all the way to get those top-level draft picks, even though in baseball there's a much greater level of variance between first round and every round of draft picks. So it really comes down to just trying to importantly take care of yourself in every round that you can. But that takes me to one of the major inherent flaws with the way this is set up. MLB playoffs still the division leaders and 2 wildcards in each league. So I'm going to say that I still think that's a bit too small for the league overall. I think that the right sweet spot would be having 3 wildcards and to go along with the six wildcards to go along with the all the division leaders. But when you look at this year, the interesting part is there's a good argument to be made that maybe we should only guarantee that 1 wild card gets to come out from each league. So that means in a year like this year, the American League could have gotten 3 of the 4 wild cards. And St. Louis would have been probably even more heartbroken than Seattle because they had that 17-game win streak this month, and to lose out because you weren't quite good enough in that wild card runner-up in the American League. So that would have been also another interesting element of chaos if each league was only guaranteed 1 wild card. And I know that league purists are going to be against the idea, but I think that it is one thing that needs to be done. That'd be a small change that would probably reward the teams that have the best overall winning record, as opposed to this default structure that we have right now. Then another thing I wanted to point out is the inherent flaw of this seeding system, because the problem is you pretty much always get with this current setup, you pretty much always get a divisional matchup in a division matchup for the divisional series. And I think that's something that needs to change, in my opinion. So that means that it should be the 2 lower records who have to play in the wild card, in my opinion. And there used to be a time where it was possible for the second best team in baseball to not make the playoffs because a wild card did not exist. But that's one thing that I think really needs to change, because we should not be seeing the Dodgers and the Giants play in the divisional series. What this wild card should really be is St. Louis and Atlanta should really be going at it, not the Dodgers. I think we need a record. We need better seeding by record. The one thing that needs to improve, it feels like it happens in at least one of the leagues every single year. So those are 2 of the main changes that I like to see with this MLB playoff format, having 1 extra wild card in each league at least, because the important part is there's always the people who complain about the postseason losing its value when you have more teams, but you gotta look at it from a business standpoint. You need to try to get a few more fan bases to be engaged in a playoff chase. Because this current system right now, it really just makes baseball meaningless for, I mean, look how much of a nosedive that the Padres and Mets took, specifically in August for the Padres and Mets. But if there was an extra wild card up for grabs, then that means their fan bases are going to have better local TV ratings. They're going to have slightly better attendance as opposed to being effectively out of it by September is just as much as like the Rockies or Cubs. And that would also benefit teams like the A's or Indians. Going to at least get 4 to 6, possibly even 8 more fan bases to stay more engaged with the product later in the season. Because with this current system setup, too many fan bases that are pretty certain that their team's not going to make that late run push just are really going to tune out and shift over to their focus to football, since that's what most fan bases do with losing teams. So if that happens, I think it's going to help the sport. And I still believe that these wildcard series must change to a best of 3. Whoever has home field gets it for all 3 games if necessary. I don't believe that the road team in a wildcard series is entitled to 1 game at home, especially since time constraints make it to where it's just going to cause more of a delay and pushes things later into the month and possibly slightly into November. And ideally, it's better to avoid November baseball, especially considering how cold it already gets in certain places for October baseball. But now let's get into these wildcard games. So tomorrow we've got the Yankees and the Red Sox from Fenway Park. And this will be the 20th time these two teams play. And I don't think I'm going to go deep into this game a lot because I don't think it's overly necessary. I think I'm more intrigued by going in deeper detail for the NL wildcard game. For me, these are 2 pretty good offensive teams in the Yankees and Red Sox. They're both kind of flawed pitching staffs. Yankees got the bullpen edge if they manage to gain a lead in this. Hold on to a lead by the time they flip things over. The Red Sox have won most of their games against them on their home field, with the exception of that late September series where I believe that the Red Sox lost 2 or 3 in Fenway. I don't think they've officially announced the pitchers for tomorrow's game, but I'll check to see. We may not really, oh yeah, it's already been announced. Garrett Cole against Nathan Ulvaldi. For Ulvaldi, he was very instrumental, especially in that World Series against the Dodgers. He had a standout performance in that World Series. 3 years ago, I believe. And he's going to need to have a repeat performance tomorrow night. He's a hard-throwing righty, but he's also someone who isn't particularly the most consistent high-level talent either. But if there's one thing that works to his advantage, that when pitching becomes a premium, teams tend to not hit as well in October. And for Garrett Cole, he's a somewhat reliable pitcher. The problem is that he does have his moments where he may give up that critical home run or two to the Red Sox, and it feels like, unlike years past where he felt more invincible, he seems to be more susceptible to that random solo shot or two. And for the Red Sox, they got home run hitters up and down that lineup. The Yankees kind of do too. I think the positive is the Yankees are finally a more balanced lineup. But I think we are going to have ourselves at least a decent game offensively. I would bet that the over-under is going to be at like about 8.5 or 9.5 is what I think it would be at. I don't believe Yahoo has an official over-under listing here, but I would guess that 8.5, 9.5 is right in line where I think this game would be for tomorrow night. And I'm about to check into that shortly. So I think that I wouldn't be surprised with the Yankees win tomorrow night. But as of right now, I'm leaning. I just feel like with the way the season has gone for the Yankees, that it's been a kind of a frustrating season because they've had moments where they are on the verge of falling out of the contention, but they had that nice little 13 or 14 game win streak in August, and that helped them be in the position they are today. And the over-under is at 8.5. I think this game is definitely going to hit the over. So, but I still feel like this is really a pick'em spot. And I'm leaning towards the Red Sox to advance. Now let's go over to the more interesting of the two games. And that will be the St. Louis Cardinals going to LA for a matchup on Wednesday night against the LA Dodgers. And as of right now, the pitching matchup is Adam Wainwright against Max Scherzer. And this is going to be a tough matchup for St. Louis because most of the damage that Max Scherzer gives up is to left-handed bats. And St. Louis is not particularly deep with lefties. Most of their top hitters are right-handed, whether it's Harrison Bader, Dylan Carlson, Nolan Arenado, Paul Goldschmidt. But they're not like a high-quality left-handed hitting team. So that will be an issue for them. And it definitely works against their advantage. Because Scherzer just does not give up many of those big hits to right-handers. Then we got the longtime Cardinal Adam Wainwright. And I think this is going to be a great moment. I think he can elevate his uh, pitching for this moment. The Dodgers started to heat up over that past week because their offense kind of was in a bit of a funk for their standards. They are probably the best offensive team in the postseason. However, one thing that will hurt their lineup is being without Max Muncy through the division series. The other issue with the Dodgers is the fact that Max Scherzer has been a bit broken ever since those last two or three outings specifically started to go a bit downhill once he had a rough performance at Coors Field. And then he had another rough performance against the Padres. But the hope is that he can get back on track for this wild card game. I think both teams got some disadvantages built into the matchup. At the same time, the Dodgers have been on the chase for so long with the Giants that San Francisco had to secure the NL West Division title on the very last day of the season. So it is possible that there could be a bit of a hangover or be a bit depressed at the end. A bit of a letdown game possibility. And even though LA does have a lot of offensive depth, it's going to be interesting to see what happens here. I'm not exactly sure who you would ideally start at first base, because you would. I don't. Wainwright tends to have relatively even splits. He's not the ace that he used to be, so you may not get the length out of him that you used to. So overall, I think for this game, I'm going to go with a relatively low score. I don't think either offense is really going to go off or even have a kind of off. To me, I think the Dodgers are now due for a momentum drop coming off of their base of the division where they just came up short. The Cardinals also, their momentum is on a slight drop after the Cubs snapped their big winning streak. But that would probably be a slightly good thing for them because they can now pick themselves back up. And even though it's a right heavy hitting team, you gotta realize that Nolan Arenado is the big local kid going into Dodger Stadium again. He's hit his fair share of home runs there. And this will be then in game 163 in 2018. He did manage to get that. He did manage to get a late home run in Dodger Stadium off of Kenley Jansen. And even though I don't anticipate a high-scoring game right now, I think that based on the recent momentum, I think it slightly favors the Cardinals more if they can continue to attack the recent flaw that Max Scherzer has gone through. Also, the bullpen, while decent, is not quite the same dynamite that it used to be. So I think my prediction right now is 4-2 win for the St. Louis Cardinals. Alright, so let's start with the other two divisional series, specifically the Chicago White Sox and the Houston Astros. So Houston's got the home field in this. They're the deep, experienced veteran team. Some pretty solid hitting throughout the lineup. Not quite as dangerous or lethal as they have been in the past. The White Sox, however, are the growing team. A lot of their youth has a big chance again. Also another team where a lot of their hitters are still pretty young, and what tends to happen is young teams generally don't have a great results in the postseason the first couple times. The Houston Astros were kind of the exception. They had a long fought series with the Royals the first time around. They arguably should have won that series in the year where Kansas City went on to win the World Series. I think White Sox fans probably felt like they still should have beat the A's last year, but they didn't really. The offense just didn't show up. So next, in a pitching battle, I really do think it's relatively even on both counts. I think the Astros have a slightly better bullpen. Other than that, slightly, pretty much the same. And this is going to be a very lengthy series in my mind. I feel like this series is going to go the full 5 games. I think both teams are going to split the home games up to game 5. But unfortunately for the White Sox, I just don't see enough. I think the experience factor is still going to go slightly against Chicago, even though they've got a manager who knows what it's like to go all the way and win a World Series in Tony La Russa. And while it's a manager in Dusty Baker who has not been able to win a World Series just yet, he still has a pretty big nucleus of a roster in Houston, which has not only won a World Series, but it has made that second World Series run as well. So I think Chicago's time will more likely be next year, and Houston, this could be their last big run for them. Then they're in a position where they could be having to do more retooling of the roster, especially since the star shortstop Carlos Correa could be considering other locations in free agency. So I like the Astros and Fox. Right, let's go on to the other American League Divisional Series, Tampa Bay Rays, and who I expected to be the Boston Red Sox. Rays got a big-time pitching edge over the Red Sox, and the Red Sox have largely struggled in the Trop for the majority of the season. The Rays the offense has picked up a bit with the acquisition of Nelson Cruz, as that could have been the one thing that held them back from winning last season in the World Series against the Dodgers. So that's where I'm at on that. I've already kind of gone through how I feel about the Red Sox pitching staff. It's above average, but no longer a top-notch staff. We saw Chris Sale struggle yesterday against the Nationals, and that seems to be what the story of his career had been even before that long-term recovery from his Tommy John surgery. And if the Rays are now a really battle-tested team, last year they went against teams who uh, looked better offensively on paper, like the Yankees and the Astros, and even the Blue Jays, and took them to task. Even though that Astros series and the Yankees both were series that went the distance. However, I think this year's Rays team is going to be able to put away this series earlier this time. I've got the Tampa Bay Rays beating the Red Sox in 4 games this time around. And now on to the National League. The Atlanta Braves and the Milwaukee Brewers. The interesting part about this series is the Braves making a playoff run and managing to recover from a rough start in the weakest division in baseball, which is the NL East. And they did a lot of patchwork at the trade deadline to get more quality depth in to replace Ronald Acuna Jr. with guys like Jorge Soler, Adam Duvall, Jock Peterson. So that was a big part of their changes to try to keep the offense good enough to put themselves in the position they are at right now. And the Milwaukee Brewers are probably the best pitching staff remaining, assuming that the Dodgers aren't able to make it past the wild card game. And that could be pivotal for them, especially if that outcome does happen, because I think it would end up being a pretty good advantage for them overall, as the Brewers had slowly, one of the problems that they had was lacking some big league quality hitters. They took some steps to improve in that aspect with Willie Adames and Eduardo Escobar, making themselves at least give themselves some veterans who are a bit more respectable hitters for a playoff run, especially with all the down years that some of the more mainstays of the rosters had, like Christian Yelich, Ryan Braun, Lorenzo Cain, among others. But this is probably where the Braves are going to come up. Just aren't going to have the pitching to keep up in this series. Even with Corbin Burns, Brandon Woodruff, Adrian Hauser, Johnny Peralta, the Brewers just have too good of a pitching rotation, even though they got beat up in that series sweep in Dodger Stadium. If they lose, that's going to be irrelevant going forward. But I feel like this is a series where the Brewers will sweep. That pitching staff, coupled with the Braves offense, has a lot of, even though I also think the Braves are still going to have that hangover of blowing that 3-1 series lead last year against the LA Dodgers. And I get the feeling that a lot of their top hitters are going to struggle through that series. The next, Giants and Cardinals. The Giants, low-key, somehow managed to have an incredible season with 106 wins. That was a monumental step up from where they were last season, when they just barely missed out on a playoff spot in finishing ninth in the National League. And it was a big step forward with second-year manager Gabe Kapler. And we can't, while the pitching on paper, you look at that and you're not impressed and don't really notice a significant difference, but there's been a lot of the guys have made some big improvements. We know Johnny Cueto, what he is, and he's actually turned himself. He's kind of like the Adam Wainwright, another Adam Wainwright type, the deep veteran pitcher who's trying to put himself on that comeback part. Don't forget about Logan Webb, Kevin Gausman, three of the top pitchers, along with that ballpark, which makes it pretty advantageous for that pitching staff. Then we got St. Louis, who has done a lot of patchwork in their rotation to get this far. However, when we mentioned Nolan Arenado, he's going to be the X factor because he's also got some really impressive numbers in Oracle Park throughout his career. Then Paul Goldschmidt, another guy who has done some pretty good damage there as well. So I feel like this is another 5 games. This is, in my opinion, a 4-game series. I'm kind of partial to the idea of 5, but I feel like St. Louis is probably going to blow a late game lead. The Giants have been one of the big time walk-off teams, and another big change is they've transformed. They were one of the worst home run hitting teams in baseball, and now many of their guys have had bounce back years, such as Brandon Belt, Brandon Crawford, Buster Posey hitting the ball out better, the young outfielding core, the Mike Yastrzemski, Alex Dickerson struggled, but he has that power. Lamont Wade Jr. came out of nowhere and had a breakout season for them. Then Chris Bryant really helped bolster their outfield, and he can be third base as well. And we know what you'll get from Evan Longoria, Wilmer Flores in the infield. Then you got Donovan Solano for depth, and Tommy La Stella. So this Giants hitting core is pretty deep, and I think that's what's going to give them an advantage as they win in 4. Now, League Championship Series time. Rays and Astros. Given that this is going to be a different stage compared to last year where it was neutral field. And I think that small thing is what led to Tampa Bay playing deeper, playing longer series compared to last year. And I think they were the team who probably saw the most negative effect by the playoff bubble, because I think that Pitching staff got tired out as well by the time they went into the World Series last year. While the Dodgers, on the other hand, even though both teams went to 7 games in the league championship, they had the advantage of getting a sweep in the divisional series against the Padres. So I think unlike last year when this matchup was set, I think that home field advantage is going to be stronger for Tampa Bay. While Houston, on the other hand, I don't think they're going to have the same neutralization isn't going to work as well for them. And we know that these are two pretty playoff tested teams by now. But this year is going to be a bit different in my mind. It's going to be the Rays winning in 6 games. And now on to the National League Championship Series between the Milwaukee Brewers and San Francisco Giants. And this is going to be a great matchup, for pitching especially. And I think this is one team where the Giants actually don't have a pitching edge against, and that would be Milwaukee. So I am pretty concerned about this series, because if there's one thing that we do know about playoff baseball is you can have the most stacked offense of the year at the time, but it's pitching that wins over in the postseason. And we saw it happen back in 2019 when the Washington Nationals pulled off that incredible divisional series upset against the LA Dodgers. And it wasn't until last year when the Dodgers finally broke through in that, coming up short. Then the Giants, even though they do have a few core pieces still left behind from their past World Series runs, such as Brandon Crawford, Buster Posey. I think Brandon Belt's been on a World Series championship Giants team, even though they have not won since, I believe, 2012. But the key is there's enough guys that have been around long enough, so they've got the experience factor on their side. I think the Brewers got some major sense of redemption on their mind because of the fact that they could not get the job done with home field against the Dodgers back in 18, I believe, yeah. And they could not, then I believe, lost 2 more. They lost the Dodgers back-to-back. Then they lost to them in a divisional. I know they lost to them in a divisional round in the following year as well. And last year, I believe they missed out. Yeah, they missed out altogether last season. So the injuries were kind of rough on them in that shortened 60-game season. So I think I'm going to lean Brewers here. The X factor is always pitching, and they got the edge there. I believe that timely hitting is a bit predictable. Teams who don't really rely on high average tend to have a more higher reliability for those timely hits compared to a team who often plays in a strong hitting environment a lot more than others. So I know both of those teams. The Giants actually have the edge in my mind for the timely hits, but when if the Brewers pitching shows up in the way I expect it to, I feel like Milwaukee's going to get it done there instead. So I feel like Milwaukee's going to win this series 5 games. I know it's going to be, I like to say 6, but I feel like 5 is more in line with what I feel is right. So for the World Series now, let's finish up here. I feel league executives counting tables, breaking screens, punching air because they get the Rays and the Brewers in the World Series. And you know that they're going to be very upset because neither of these markets are really going to be pivotal to the casual fan in ratings. And I would love to see this outcome happen as well, because MLB needs this type of outcome, kind of like with the NBA Finals between the Suns and the Bucks. There were so many people complaining about 2 small market teams being in it, because we noticed that MLB and NBA are the 2 most guilty sports of just wanting big market teams to face each other in their championship series year in and year out. MLB doesn't, at least you know that they aren't as control freaks about it, because we know that in the NBA, if you're facing the Lakers or the Nets, that whistle is going to be mostly against you. They may give you a game or 2 just for keep people honest, but overall, you know when the outcome they want is in danger, you can pretty much count on referees to try to make sure that they get their desired outcome. And why it would be great is because I'm sure these teams will have to overcome some bad disadvantages umpiring behind the plate, because we do know that when it really becomes costly, that gives teams extra runs, and we should really get to a point where we have a automated strike zone. However, we gotta be able to determine what constitutes a borderline strike. And in my opinion, if there's a ball that's right on the edge, my thought process is you must be able to, more than half the ball must be in that zone. Just like with the offensive basket interference in basketball, that means more than half the ball must be off the cylinder. And I think that will help umpires. Umpires will still need to use their personal judgment to determine those balls that touch the edge of the zone. And I think that's going to be the fair compromise if we ever institute that type of system. Before I get into this World Series fully, one other point I'd like to make is another change that I like to see with MLB playoffs is that I believe teams should be able to set their roster every single game. I do not agree with the idea of having to go with a 25-man roster for a whole series. So, for example, that means it will allow teams to rotate out, uh, cycle out your starters more up until that elimination game. And that's one reason why it would be better for the MLB to let teams establish a 25-man roster every single game as opposed to the whole series. And that would, at one, and it looked like if the Dodgers advance, they could really benefit from having the luxury of saying we could get Muncy back in game 4, game 5 instead of waiting for him in the championship series. And that's another change I'd like to see with MLB because I do believe that you should be able to put that 40-man roster if you full use if you deem fit. And and I know that deep pitching staffs like the Rays, Brewers, and the Dodgers would really put that benefit to use if they were able to cycle their starters in and out in order to maybe add an extra bat on the bench or those 2 extra relievers, or be able to put a reliever that's been overworked on inactive. And that would be, I think that would be a big benefit to pretty much every team. Or being able to get a injured hitter back in the middle of the series would probably be another luxury that this rule change would have. So that's the last rule change that I'd like to see with the MLB playoffs. Now onto the World Series. Rays and Brewers. I believe Tampa Bay will have home field in this series against Milwaukee. I actually feel like I still believe Milwaukee has a starting pitching edge against Tampa Bay. Even though both these bullpens are pretty much equal in my mind. As for the hitting lineups, when it comes down to that, I feel like Tampa Bay's hitting is a bit more trustworthy in this spot. But we see so many of these series so often go deep. Unlike other sports where we tend to see a lot more shorter series, the great thing about MLB is you rarely ever get those 4-game sweeps in a World Series. One of the last notable 4-game sweeps I can remember was when the Rockies got swept by the Red Sox in the World Series. And what's also great is we rarely ever see series that only go 5 games as well. I mean, last year we had 6 games between the Dodgers and Rays, and 6-game series between and then a 7-game series between the Nationals and Astros. I think the Dodgers and Red Sox, that one went 5 games. Astros and Dodgers went the distance. Cubs and soon to be Guardians went the distance. Orioles and Mets went 6. I know the Giants and Rangers went 7, I think. The Rangers and Cardinals, they went 6. So yeah, there's been so many deep, lengthy series. We should be in for a long series as well. So I feel like the Rays come away with this in 7 games. 2021 World Series champion. They'll finally get the vindication of the way that they like to build the roster. And that's a very big developmental roster where they have put together an extremely deep prospect system. It's amazing how they can just trade key players in their lineup and they have someone else ready to pick up right where they left off. The example being Blake Snell getting traded off of that first World Series run to San Diego, get a couple key pieces in return that will be helpful in the organization. And that's what's really impressive is how often Tampa Bay tends to win in transactions. They rarely ever lose. And probably the only time that they ever lost a trade was when they traded for Corey Dickerson a few years ago, and the Rockies ended up with Jake McGee and German Marquez, who, if they had been patient enough to hold on to Marquez, he would be a big part of that back end of that rotation. But the thing that's most important is they got the best, one of the best management and scouting in all of baseball. And this World Series would be great for them because it would probably help them get that revenue that would a big boost in revenue. That way they could hopefully stay or at least avoid being in a situation where they play in 2 places part-time, because that'd be the last thing I want to see. Even though they may not be able to, hopefully they do end up moving into the city of Tampa eventually, because I do think that will help things a bit as opposed to being in St. Petersburg. And hopefully a World Series win will be the thing that will boost that for them. So there you have it. That's the predictions. I kept that within an hour. Yay me. And thanks so much to everyone for watching my MLB postseason predictions right here on the Rochford Files with your host, Andrew Rochford. I have another couple of busy afternoons ahead, so I'm not exactly sure when I'll be able to record some clips of the recent happenings in politics. I'll try to get something up, maybe even late tonight, but we'll see though, because I'll probably just focus on the start of a preseason NBA, especially with the Nuggets playing their first game of the preseason. I'm really looking forward to this upcoming NBA season, and I'll probably sometime in the next couple of weeks I'll do a full NBA season preview in addition to that stream last week. That way I can actually try to predict where everyone falls in the conference standings. So with that being said, this is Andrew Rochford saying goodbye